Jessie Colbert, welcome to the Further Forward podcast.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. I know we have so much to get into, and this will be the first episode of its kind. I have not spoken to anyone who is in the maternal mental health space, anyone who's in like the legislative space. And I think that people, especially mothers, need this conversation so badly right now. So truly, thank you so much for coming.
Awesome. Happy to be here, and let's get into it.
All right. So who are you? How are you coming to us today?
Sure. A few things. In terms of my work, when people ask me about it, I usually answer in phases. So I will say I'm a maternal health advocate because I feel like people might know what that means. And then they ask a little more, and they might have heard of what a lobbyist is. And then I'll say a little more and say, well, actually, I work on maternal mental health, and then folks certainly can relate to that and usually have something to share about it. And then I'll get into a little further and talk about working in Massachusetts. So it ends up being a little bit of a mini civics lesson when I talk about what I do. But I do run a coalition called Mind the Gap Massachusetts, and we'll get into some of the work we do, but we advocate for policies that impact perinatal mental health, so mental health for parents during pregnancy and postpartum. A huge part of my identity is being a mom myself. I have three beautiful kids. They are 19, 17, and 11, and I'm in the phase of launching a couple of them. One is in college, and one is about to be in college, and one is younger. So I think a big part of my identity is being a middle-aged person and being in that phase of motherhood, feeling, being in my 50s, feeling very grateful for my good health and also feeling very justified in spending time, energy, and money on keeping it that way. I feel like, Ashley, you know more about like the Enneagram and the signs and all that. I don't really know a lot about that. I did do the Enneagram test once, and I'm a number one, which is like a perfectionist, one of those people that it wants to make things better. It was kind of cute when I did it. I asked my husband to guess which one, and he was very sweet. He picked like being a nurturer and a mom. I was like, no, like I'm one of those people that, sees things and thinks that they're the one that needs to fix that. So that characterizes me too.
That's where we connect. I'm kind of a equal, like I was like 1% off an 8 and a 1.
Okay. I forget what 8 is.
Yeah, I don't remember either at this point, but yeah, that makes total sense. And I think especially when you're talking about doing stuff that will ultimately change people's lives for the better, you kind of have to be able to see problems and to also see solutions, which you do both. I want to go back before we go forward though. Is this who you wanted to be when you were a little girl? Was this the dream, like helping people in some way, or?
Not really. I had a pretty meandering career path. I was a good student, and I remember that my teachers and my parents would always say to me, "You can be whatever you want." And I would always think, like what? I think kids, you probably know the careers that you see, that your parents, you see teachers, you might see a doctor, but what really is out there? And I think I was pretty lost trying to figure that out. I remember in college, every semester was like a crisis when I tried to figure out my major. And again, I was a good student. So, and I come from an academic community. I come from Amherst, and I think I struggled because I felt like I should want to be a real expert in something, and that wasn't really how my brain worked. And it took a long time for me to figure out that I'm more of a generalist. So even though I have worked, more in a more focused way on this issue of perinatal mental health, I found after lots of fits and starts that I have thrived and done well in roles where it's not so much about being an expert, but it's about using different skills. Fundraising and politics are where I landed. Those are jobs where you're using people skills, you're using organizational skills, you're using writing skills. And those are all the things I like to do. I might not be an expert in the thing. I've gotten to develop an expertise in this. But, for example, one of my first fundraising jobs was in the arts. And so I would learn about art conservation. That wasn't my job to be an expert, but it was to take what that person was doing and translate it into a grant, for example. And I think there's some of that now that I do is working with people who may have that expertise, that lived experience, and translating it for legislators, for example.
You do kind of think that being an expert is where you should strive to land, right? Like being the best and being competitive. And then when you think about being a woman and, everybody's trying to break a glass ceiling and everybody's trying to like prove a point. And I don't think that that's bad, but I think that maybe you could miss really knowing yourself or getting to know what your strengths are. And so I love that you kind of I know it was terrifying for you in the moment, but I love that you kind of found your way anyway. So,
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, it was a pretty roundabout path, but I'm really happy in what I'm doing now.
how did you find your way into just the maternal space in general? Was it when you became a mom or before then?
It was around the same time. So I had happened to work for a wonderful woman, a legislator, a big mentor of mine. Her name was Ellen Story,
Mhm.
and I worked for her for twice actually. I worked for her out of college. Shout out to Ellen Story, by the way, who was the force behind the transgender law and equal pay law in Massachusetts. So I'll just say that
Yeah, thank
she's
you.
wonderful. So I happened to work for her when she filed some legislation way back when, over a dozen years ago, when New Jersey started screening moms for postpartum depression. And she was a person who worked a lot on health, mental health, women's issues, and saw that. And she felt that Massachusetts likes to think we're on the forefront of those issues and felt that we should do something on that issue. And so filed a very ambitious bill, um, which was ahead of its time. It called for some things that actually haven't happened until the omnibus maternal health law, which I hope we'll talk about today. But this very ambitious bill, sometimes legislation gets tabled, it gets put to quote unquote study, or a commission is created, but and the commission isn't always very active. But this very ambitious bill that she filed did create a commission, and that commission was actually very active and had done some terrific things over the years. So I worked for her as an aide, but then when this commission, what was an ambitious bill that turned into a commission, was established, my role became to be the staff person for that
Right.
commission. And so that's how I got into the issue. And then after so I have done some other things on the issue which I can talk about, but that was when I first started working on it.
Was it about a sense of justice? What was your internal driving factor? And the reason why I'm asking is because I think all of us, especially as women, I I think that voice is always there, and I think that a lot of just stuff gets thrown on top of it, and sometimes we can struggle to hear ourselves underneath the noise, but I think that our morals and our values are actually really strong underneath all of it. What we stand for, what keeps us up at night, what makes us cry, what breaks our heart. And so I guess I'm wondering like what that was for you.
I felt like I was in a position to make a difference on something that was very important. So when I worked on the commission for her, we had this big group of experts, folks with lived experience, who were appointed to the commission, and we struggled with where to even start on this issue, because we'll talk about this further, but what really characterizes the issue of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is just how prevalent they are and just how much they are unaddressed. So we know that 50 to 70% of folks dealing with this challenge are not identified. And then of those that are identified, 75% do not make it to care. So as a commission, we struggled. We worked on, how do we work on screening? How do we work on education? How do we work on there being the resources out there once somebody does screen positive? So it was, you know, it was working that job was hearing for years and years about something that was so compelling and so little was being done. And then I had a series of part-time jobs after I had kids. I didn't go back to work full time. I also worked in fundraising. So, and after I was a staff person for the commission, I was appointed to serve on it. So I went to these meetings and I would go to meeting after meeting, and it would be very frustrating to hear about how there wasn't enough money. This wasn't being prioritized. And I was at a moment of transition when one of my kids was going to school. And it was literally in the middle of a meeting when I was hearing about this yet again, about the lack of funding. There was a panel discussion of some community based initiatives, and the person who had taken my job as the staff person had them each say, what is your biggest success and what is your biggest challenge? And to a person, they said their biggest challenge was money. And I just had this aha moment like, well, I have, this fundraising background. I know this issue. There is money. It's just you don't have it. you know. So
Yeah.
I felt like um, not only how important it was, but just hearing that there really wasn't a strong enough voice either in the government side or in the philanthropic side for this issue. And I kind of had these two pieces of my career, and I literally turned to the friend next to me and said, "I'm going to found a nonprofit." But it happened in that moment. So it was really about um, being in a position where I felt I could do something about something important.
Mm, wow, thank you for that. Now we have to go back. We're at a perfect moment to kind of define, you know, you threw out some big statistics there. Like,
Sure.
uh, what is perinatal mental health? What are
Mhm.
PMDDs? Um, even for people who have been pregnant, you might not know what they are, what that means, how to know if you need help, all those kinds of things. So can you just kind of give us an overview of these terms?
Sure. It's a little bit like how I talk about my career where I answer in phases like, what's the
Yes.
word people know? They know the word postpartum depression, but that's actually a misnomer. We say perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Perinatal means the time period during pregnancy and in those 12 months afterwards. And I would say that these mental health challenges can continue even for years afterwards. And there is data to back that up. And we also know that these are mental health challenges that birthing people can enter the pregnancy with. So it's about, in terms of onset, it's about a third, a third, a third. So about third of the people might come into the pregnancy and typically with an undiagnosed or, if they're lucky and receiving care for a mental health diagnosis, about a third or during pregnancy and about a third take place after. So it's not
Wow.
just afterwards. Um, and then mood and anxiety disorders is an important word, and we say PMADs because there are a number of mental health complications that occur. There's depression, there is anxiety. Sometimes you have both. There are subsets of that anxiety. OCD is something that sometimes happens. Birth trauma, that is a huge one. I think that the statistics on that. Don't even represent that experience and how common that is. There is also bipolar disorder is half of the time when it's diagnosed is diagnosed in that period for women, and there is also an even more acute diagnoses postpartum psychosis, which occurs in about 0.1 or 2 per thousand. But it's really important to be educated about because it's a medical emergency. Um, so that's the range. A lot of our work has been around screening because there is so much misinformation, fear, and stigma around these issues, that might not know that you are experiencing them, and many times the symptoms are similar to whatever you might understand, um, around depression, for example, at another time of your life. One of the wonderful founders in this field would say it is a depression with very bad timing. But,
Yeah.
disturbances in sleep, appetite, feeling like maybe this baby is better off without me. Sometimes feeling disconnected with the baby, but not always. This is where we need education. Sometimes people have a lot of anxiety symptoms. They don't feel depressed, but they also can't ever sleep when the baby sleeps. So I think some of what we know around mental health issues generally is really relevant here if it's interfering with your ability to care for yourself, care for the baby. And screening is really important. For folks to get asked the right questions and understand all the different ways that this can present. But I think because we really need to screen, we really need to educate people because oftentimes you will be feeling some version of some of these symptoms, but there's so much shame around it. That you don't tell anyone, and then you feel worse and worse, and you just think, I'm the worst mom ever. I don't like my baby very much, and it must be because I'm a horrible mother. And you do not know that these are symptoms of a mental health issue.
I just have to let that breathe for a moment. I obviously think, I'm listening to some of the things that you're saying, and it's how could you not be depressed? How could you not be anxious? It's what made it so challenging is like I'm giving birth in a pandemic. Of course, I'm fucking anxious.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know,
And how
I'm
do you know the difference? Yep.
How do you know the
For sure.
difference? And of
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course I'm not sleeping because every time I lay him down on his back, he's screaming, and so now I have to sleep with a baby on my chest, and I think as a first-time mom, especially, like, I didn't know what was normal, what was not normal, and then the pandemic added extra challenges. I mean, I gave birth in 2021, so it was a little bit better, but there was just still so much information that we didn't have that it made it hard for me to know if I was experiencing something where I needed help and if I was just experiencing something that everyone had experienced. And especially as a Black woman, you're just told to suck it up and be
Yeah.
strong and, and the women of my bloodline has surely experienced much worse than I was experiencing with all of my privilege. And how do you how would you even begin to ask for help if you're not sure you need it? I know that's a hard question to answer, but please try.
Yeah. I mean, I think a few things. Certainly there are discrete mental health diagnoses, but I don't think that's the only issue you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And it's important for us to figure out how to identify those and to look out for those warning signs that are a little bit more acute, in terms of how you're feeling about yourself, how you're feeling about the transition to motherhood, and those symptoms, I think, that I mentioned can be a good checklist. But I also have come to think very, very differently about how new motherhood should be, right?
Right.
And I think that that encompasses helping um, all of us and not just people that might have a mental health diagnosis, right? So you have said such powerful things about this. I think there is what we're sold about how motherhood is supposed to look and feel like, and then there's the reality of what it
Yeah.
is, right? And our systems are set up for, like, choice number 1, right?
Yes.
So you are gonna be feeling like if any of these things are present, again, even if you don't have a mental health diagnosis, that, like, I just must be doing it wrong. I just must be a terrible mother. And, talk about the pandemic, being isolated, I think that that highlighted some problems that we have always had, as mothers. I think we all think that we're doing it wrong. Um, right? And I think that we need to come together not only practically, because we all need more community, more community support,
Right.
um, but emotionally to break the isolation of saying like, oh my God, like my baby was up all night. Like it breaks through looking at that next mom and thinking, well, she's doing it right and I'm not, because we are all having the same experience.
That's so true, and that was something that pissed me off then and that still pisses me off now, and I'm so lucky to have girlfriends that are older than me to say, "These other moms are lying." If they're saying that it's perfect, if they're saying that, their baby sleeps all the time and eats perfectly and all that stuff, like, they're lying. Don't believe what you see on social media. Don't believe in this idea of, you know, some kind of perfect or ideal or whatever. Um, and it's also tough to get, to not get sucked into that. And, um, that said though,
I think you have to find friends. Oh, sorry. Go
no, no,
say
no.
what you
Yeah,
can say
you're
also. No, I think
go.
you have to find friends in a community that's gonna be real about that,
Yeah,
because there might be I'm not saying that some people might not have it together or some people might not have it be real lucky and have a lot of help, and have an easy baby, but that is not a system,
that's
right?
not a system.
And also I think you have to find the friends that are real.
Yeah,
But go ahead.
true. That is true. No, no. And I'm thinking then, so, okay, you have this baby, you go to your OB at 6 or 8 weeks after you've had the baby, you get a checklist, da 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 da, and then you see them the next time you need a pap smear or the next time you're pregnant. Who else could have screened you? Where like what else
Sure.
is there?
Yeah, yeah. So, I'll I'd love to speak to screening, and I also think we really need to think so differently about this time period in women's and birthing people and families' lives. I mean, it's really pretty stunning. That's what I mean about giving lip service to mothers. And there's so much care for you during pregnancy. And then it's like, see ya. Like it is
Bye.
really stunning. And then why would you not feel it's your fault if there's kind of nothing built in to help you,
Right.
right? I think the system kind of reinforces that feeling. Um, but in terms of identifying a mental health challenge, we are really trying to do a whole lot better here in Massachusetts. And in the time that I've worked on this, there's been a major change in terms of all the professional bodies and the practices and some of the resources that are out there. So, in terms of supporting screening and the opinions that have come out from all of those groups around screening, when I first started working on this with Rep. Story a long time ago, those things were not in place. And so now, for example, ACOG recommends screening at the initial visit, screening later in pregnancy, screening later. The pediatricians recommend screening throughout that first year. And we're super lucky because here in Massachusetts, in the Omnibus Maternal Health Law, there were mandates around on the providers to screen, there were mandates on the um, um, insurance providers to cover that screening. And I hope that we will see a lot better results in terms of that. Mass Health, for example, has done just a terrific job. Addressing this, they put out a bulletin, I think it was last summer, where they, kind of gave the guidance to doctors and midwives and said, here's what you have to do, and here's the code right here, and here is the resource right here. And there are, when we first started working on this, I think a big challenge was that non mental health care providers were the ones who needed to catch this, and they did not feel prepared to do that.
Wow.
But since that has happened, we now have a couple of terrific initiatives, both here in Massachusetts and nationally, that can back up those doctors. So
Joy.
the huge one was established in 2014, and it's called McPAP for Moms. And this was a program established by a terrific leader by the name of Dr. Nancy Byatt, looking at the lack of resources in terms of providers who could care for moms with some kind of specialization in perinatal mental health, and specifically on the provider side. So her idea was, if we can train OBGYNs, they are prescribers, they are MDs, so we could increase the capacity through this program. So it does a few things. It trains OBGYNs to screen. It trains them to treat in fairly simple cases, like if somebody needed to be prescribed an antidepressant. And then if there was a more complicated case, there's a consultation line so they could reach a perinatal psychiatrist and get some help. And if it was a case where that person really needed to be referred out, they have a really robust referral service. So this is important, not just because it increases the capacity, but because it addresses that barrier of an OB, a midwife who says, I can't screen this person because then what am I going to do? This really backs them up and has been tremendous, and actually was a model for the first piece of federal legislation that was funded in 2018 to fund other states to do similar programs. And that funding has been re-upped a couple of times since then. We also have a national maternal mental health hotline. So the network is improving. We still don't have terrific data on what screening is taking place. And in Massachusetts, we should have some more coming out of those mandates that were in the omnibus maternal health law. But we are making progress.
Okay. I think myself included, like the general public, I think that given the state of politics, many of us have become a little bit more interested in how a bill is formed, how a bill comes into law, what has to happen when lawmakers are like negotiating and things are coming out and things are going in and all this kind of stuff. So could you talk about it? But then I'm going to ask you afterwards why it takes so freaking long for anything to happen when we know help is needed. Why does it take so long for help to come? Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I don't want to speak out of turn for the midwifery advocates, because the large part of the maternal health law from 2024 in Massachusetts was around certified professional midwifery care in Massachusetts, which is a really huge step forward. There were also pieces in the law around birth center care, and we know that these are solutions that are really important for the maternal health crisis in Massachusetts and nationally. This country has the worst rates of maternal mortality in the of wealthy nations, and Black moms. For Black moms, it's even worse. It's 3 to 4 times higher than maternal mortality rates. And midwifery care, home birth, birth center care has been shown to have better outcomes. And you mentioned during the pandemic, more people were turning who could turn to some of those options then. So that is a large part of the bill. That has been a long time coming. Some real powerful advocacy on the part of Bay State Birth, Neighborhood Birth Center,
Yes.
and many other leaders here in Massachusetts. So I think there were a lot of things that made that bill finally happen. Um, and our piece of it was fairly small, but I think we had been working on a piece of legislation, and I can back up and talk about the coalition, but called the Moms Matter Act. And when we realized that this larger initiative was moving, we realized we had to jump on that, or we would lose our shot. So I can talk a little bit about the process, but I think in terms of that larger bill, because Massachusetts, I think, is so invested in our hospital systems that this model of midwifery care, I think, was less familiar to legislators, and it took a long time. My friend Emily, who's an advocate, talks about socializing a bill to really get legislators to understand this issue, to understand the problem and the solution, and why we can. Um, need to make this particular change here in Massachusetts. So I think it was a long time coming. I think there were also some terrific champions behind the there was a commission on racial inequities in maternal health. There was, more data that came out around severe maternal morbidity in Massachusetts. So I think there were a lot of things that pointed to the problems on the maternity care side,
Mhm.
and there were some legislators who really made that their signature issue. So I think it was a combination of the political landscape, the racial reckoning that happened in 2020, working on midwifery care for a long, long time, legislative champions, people coming together. So it was a lot of things that I think made that happen.
I'm just and this is me and you know me, so, like, I know I can fully be myself in this moment,
Yes, please.
but I'm just like, "Well, what the fuck?" Like, Jesse, everybody knows the issues, though. Like, you didn't need data from 2020 to know that, like, Black women would do better with midwifery care in birth centers because there was already data, and I'm not yelling at you because you didn't do it.
No,
Right?
no,
But
no.
we already had evidence of racial injustice. We already had evidence of maternal injustice. We already had all of this stuff. And I feel dumb because I'm like, surely there's something that I'm missing. Even Emily saying socializing a bill, it's like, I assume that we elect really smart people to run our state. Why does it need to be socialized and take so many years when there's already evidence and studies and just I, I just don't
Yeah,
get it.
yeah. You're right not to get it, and I feel much more frustrated around, the Black maternal health issues than I do around our issues because, I certainly feel frustrated around our issues but we have had some success as a fairly new coalition. I think that the things that you are talking about are much more sticky and much more frustrating, and I think when, um, Emily is talking about socializing, it's more about the solution, and I feel absolutely as frustrated as you do about the problem and how it's not being addressed. And I think these are really thorny issues around our healthcare system and racism and capitalism and much, much bigger issues that are very tricky to address.
Hmm.
And I think that there are those, our healthcare system is very entrenched. And I think changing that is very, very difficult. And something like midwifery care, I think, was, as long as it's been worked on, was also more unfamiliar to a legislature that um, has worked very closely with healthcare institutions in Massachusetts.
What do
So
you
I think that's almost, thornier, and it's I'm just thrilled that we're making progress. And there are some huge reasons for help. Neighborhood Birth Center got its
Yes.
approval. It's going to
Yes.
be opening in Roxbury. They're going to be breaking ground. So yes, and I think absolutely totally frustrating. I think it takes so much persistence, and I think um, part of the issue is that legislators are charged with dealing with so many things and so many crises and there are thousands and thousands of bills fighting their way through the legislature every year. our issue is not terribly controversial. Nobody's going to come out and say they don't support moms. Nobody's going to come out and actually, most of the things we're working on don't have any opposition. So it's not even about that. It's about how does your issue rise to the top of all of the things that legislators are
Hmm.
focused on. So I think part of what has made us successful and has made the birth justice work successful is just sheer persistence. Finding your friends, your champions in the legislature, showing up, being a pain, being the person that they see over and over and over at the state house. And I feel like our issue, we want to get our issue on the map. There are legislators that run on education, that run on housing. Like we want people to run there. And there are some champions who have made this, their issue. Senator Liz Miranda comes to mind, Chair Marjorie Decker,
Mhm.
Rep. Brandy Fluker Reed has been a wonderful, wonderful champions. Cindy Friedman, I can go on. Making it their signature issue. So we're working on, having an agenda, being at the state house, um, and just making our issues more prominent. And even when we have success, what's the next thing and the next thing? These are not issues that are going away, and we should have just as much of a presence as any other important issue that's in front of legislators.
100%. So for the people listening, and myself included, what can the average person do who is not a lobbyist or an advocate? What are the ways that we can support the change that we want to see?
Sure. Well, I would encourage people to sign up for emails and follow at groups like Bay State Birth Coalition on the national level, Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance. And then there are opportunities. It's our job to make it easy for folks that are busy out there and care about this to take an action without taking too much of their day.
Mhm.
I'm sure you'll have my contact information. We're in the
I
process of
will.
shifting our website and our social media, so we'll update that. I'm sure in the notes, but to follow those groups. And so then when you get an email and it says like, click here and write to your legislator, I cannot um, overemphasize how important it is to take that step and how that is received on the other end. And those legislators know that you are their constituent. And when we're at the state house and we're doing our part and you've done your part, and that office can say, oh yeah, we heard from some people in our district about that. That may take you 2 minutes,
Yeah.
but that is a super important step. And again, that shows that legislator, it helps them choose if they're going to focus on our issue or some other issue. That again, that helps our issue rise to the top. So I would say follow the groups that are more closely involved in the process. And when there's an action to take, your letter really makes a difference.
Are there ever opportunities where people need to show up at the state house?
There sure are. Massachusetts has a 2-year legislative cycle. So we often show up around the hearings for a bill. Every bill has a hearing before whatever the subject matter committee is. So that's a chance to show up, and we organize people who have lived experience, who have various expertise to come to the State House. There are also advocacy days that take place. So again, if you want to follow Bay State Birth, if you want to follow March of Dimes, Massachusetts, there are days when we show up en masse. And again, folks who do a job like mine are going to help organize it. So you don't have to go to the State House knowing what all the bills are,
Yeah.
but we're going to hand you a sheet. You come and you can share sort of that personal story, which is really so, so powerful for legislators. So I think it's not always easy to take time out of your day, and legislators know that. So it really makes a difference to show up in person. Our coalition, Mind the Gap Coalition, we're working actually on surveying our members on what they have availability to do, whether they can come
Okay.
to the state house, or they're able to testify, or they're able to write a letter to the editor. Just because people may have various moments when they have more or less time, they can plug in, they can do something that they are good at, and if there's a way that they want to help, we want to capitalize on that.
Okay. Thank you. That is super helpful. And I'll make sure that all of those links and information are in the notes so that I can make it easy for people. What is what's the aim of Mind the Gap? What are you most excited about? What are you working on?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would share that just a brief history of the coalition is that we were formed with help from Postpartum Support International, and they have a larger national policy agenda. And they zoomed in back in 2022 to help us get organized and get the coalition off the ground.
Okay.
And when we were initially formed, their model is that you pick one policy goal to work on, and we decided to work on something called the Moms Matter Act, um, which is two grant programs. One that would invest in expanding and diversifying the perinatal mental health workforce. In other words, training mental health providers so they can specialize in our issues, so that if somebody is screened and does make their way to a referral for care, that there is a provider that is a good fit for them on the other end of that referral.
Okay.
The other grant program is around community-based programs, particularly in historically marginalized communities. This bill was modeled after a bill in the Black Maternal Health Caucus's Momnibus Act, but it is a Massachusetts bill. So we worked on that. We were able to get half of that Moms Matter Act, the part. Oh, and I would add that we just, we at the time it was post COVID, and there was a lot of talk about the mental health pipeline and how there were not enough mental health providers out there generally.
Yep.
So that's part of why we wanted to focus on that and just kind of raise our hand and say this is an issue that is impacting our population, that is impacting moms too.
Yeah.
So we were able to get that piece around community-based programs in the omnibus law, and we were able, with our help from our legislative champions, to get funding. So first there was a grant program with no grants. Then we were able to get
Okay.
the funding. So right now we're focused on supporting some organizations that are applying for those funds, and we should know in a couple of
Okay.
months who's actually running with that money. And there's so many great groups out there. So we've been focused on that. And we will have to focus on that funding re-upping in this year's budget. So that
Okay.
will be a big focus. We also have a platform of 6 bills that we're working on, and some of them have to do with mental health, perinatal mental health workforce, and care, mental health care, and some are related issues, but we are here to show up on the mental health angle. So we have 6 priorities. Some of them are the doula bill, the midwifery bill, following up other things that need to happen to strengthen what we did in the omnibus law. So those are our efforts that are led by other coalitions, but we plug in and we talk about the mental health impact of, for example, doula care.
Okay.
We're working on the diaper bill to make sure there is better access to diapers for low income families. And then one bill that we are actually working very hard on has to do with more acute perinatal mental health conditions and criminal sentencing. And it is a bill that says if that an alleged crime is committed in the 12 months after somebody has given birth, that that person needs to be evaluated by an expert for an acute perinatal mental health issue. And if that is determined that they were experiencing that or are, then they need to be diverted out of the criminal justice system. Secondly, that if somebody was committed, are already in the system, already in prison, and this sort of condition was not considered, that they would be able to petition for resentencing. And the third piece says that if the penalty for the alleged crime could be life in prison without parole, that these mental health conditions would be considered a mitigating factor.
Wow.
So we're working very hard. We would love to be the second state in the country um, that has some protections like this. So I think if you think there is stigma around postpartum depression, this is an issue that is highly stigmatized, and moms who go through it are really demonized. And sometimes it is, um, the worst case scenario. It's a very dangerous illness, but we are um, feel very strongly that there is not enough care, that moms themselves are victims of this illness. They are not in their right mind. And it is grossly unfair for something that might have happened during that untreated illness to follow them the rest of their lives.
that would be such an incredible, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking about the mom in Duxbury a few years ago, right?
Mhm.
And just
Mhm.
even if you watch online, because we're a part of a community, whether we're in person or whether we're taking in the news on a platform or whatever, and you can tell that so many people just don't understand what might be going on when someone is experiencing postpartum psychosis or something that needs immediate medical attention. And because, I mean, what did you say? It was point something percent or point
Yeah.
something out of a,
Yeah.
and like, we may not know anyone or think we know anyone who's experienced this. So it feels so, to your point of stigma, it feels so out there. It feels so unimaginable. And yet there are obviously women who are suffering and need help, but they also need our understanding for bills like this to even pass, right? Like we have to be able to understand and have compassion and empathy as well. It's heavy.
Yeah, for sure. And because it is a medical emergency, because it's typically not diagnosed, this is one where we really need to educate people, and including families and providers, because this is not something that you can really screen for. It's something where you need to know the warning signs. And Postpartum Support International has a terrific discussion tool around this that I'd love to share out in the notes.
Okay, please. Yeah, let's definitely do that. I think it would be important.
Yeah.
How do you stay grounded and whole and well in the incredible but also hard work that you're doing?
Um, sure. I mean, I feel really, I really love my work, so I don't think about it, and I feel really lucky to do it. I
Mm,
feel really lucky to work with friends and colleagues that I work with, and that's part of why I love my job.
wow.
And I think it's an exciting time to work on this because we have made progress. Our issue has become, we've raised the profile of it at the state house, and it's a pretty short path, frankly, because this is so common and people know what it is. So I think to raise awareness of it and to bring some solutions to the state house feels pretty exciting. And so I think it's a good time to be working on this. Is it frustrating? Sure. Um, and I am really lucky. I would say one thing that I really lean on is there are other people who have a similar role, who lead organizations or lead coalitions, and um, we certainly lean on each other and touch base with one another and collaborate with one another. And that's, sometimes real practical, like, what are you hearing about when the House budget is coming out? Things like that. But also, if there are any tricky issues, if I'm wondering how to handle something, these are people that sit in the same seat I do.
Mm,
And who I really trust and respect and look up to. So that's something. And I love what I do. I think the voices of people, particularly with lived experience, and folks who have never been to the state house before, find it pretty empowering to do that. And so I feel very lucky to kind of be their cheerleader
I
and their staff person.
I love that. I love that. What about your kids? Like, do you talk about birth justice at the dinner table? Do you talk about politics? Do you talk about ICE? Do you talk about what's going on in the world?
Sure. I don't feel like I'm a super model of this. As I mentioned, I have friends that do related work, and they will sometimes say, I talked about what I was doing about this, and then we both went to the rally and we both did this and that. And it's not quite as much of a straight line in my house. I have three very strong-willed kids. They have a strong sense of social justice. They follow the news. They know what's going on. They certainly know what I do, but I don't think that's necessarily the strongest voice. But I also think it's like a lot of things in parenting where you are trying to be true to your conscience, you're trying to do what's right, and your kids will notice. And I think that will bear fruit. But I also think they're strong-willed, independent people, and they will do the right thing in their own way and on the things that they care about.
Are you good at asking for help as a mother?
I've gotten there. I've gotten there
Okay,
actually.
all right.
Yeah, yeah, so, I mean, I'm
Oh,
a super type A person, you know, but as we were talking about earlier, I feel very strongly that the expectation around moms doing everything is just crazy,
yeah.
and we can talk about that. But I remember from the get go really vividly being in the hospital. My first daughter was a C-section, so I would say not only did I come to parenthood being like super uptight and not
That's so
easygoing, right? But I also like I didn't know what was good about being easygoing, right? Like,
yeah.
you get
Yeah,
things
I
done.
feel you on some I feel that, okay?
So,
Yeah.
but again, I remember being in the hospital. I had a C-section with my daughter. I couldn't move much.
Mhm.
And I remember the nurses helping me, and I remember just being like, "Thank you so much." Like I literally could not do that myself, and you were helping me. And I think that that was the beginning of really I mean, I'm a different person.
Yeah.
I think you really cannot do it all yourself. It is incredibly humbling. I think parenthood is so funny because you have to bring such humility, but also confidence
So
to
true.
it. And 20 years in, I might be working it out.
Mhm.
But yes, I have learned to ask for help, and I think that that is really political, and I think we all need to talk about it.
Amen.
Everybody needs help. There are only so many hours in the day. This myth around motherhood is a disaster for, our mental health. I think we need to be real about what it takes. You've said terrific things about unpaid work. Somebody's got to do all those things. And why do we think those things are not important? Because they're not paid, unless you can pay somebody to do them, and not everybody can. So there are lots of ways we can make it work. But I don't think our society is set up for it to work well.
No.
Childcare, leave, um, all those things.
Mhm. Mhm. I don't think balance exists, and I've tried. I mean, I've tried, Jesse, I've tried so hard to have some sense of balance, but I read something that said, if things are balanced, then that means they all have equal weight, and not everything deserves to have equal weight. So I'm trying to like shift my own lens to be like, okay, what deserves the most weight in this moment? Like, what deserves more of my energy, more of my time, more of my whatever? But it's really, really hard because on some level, I feel like I'm always failing. I'm either failing, like I didn't drink enough water, or I haven't texted someone back for 17 days, or, like, so as someone who's further along in the journey than I am, I mean, do you believe in balance?
Yeah, I don't even think about it that way.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
Well, I mean, I just think there are only so many hours in the day, and it's not possible to be doing everything full time. There just aren't that many hours. So I think if you're lucky enough to be able to farm some of those things out, to delegate some of those things, like you said, like your kid is home, your kids are home, you're supposed to be working at the same time. I mean, sometimes you can pull that off, but there are 2 jobs there, and somebody needs to be doing one of them, right? And I think I've been lucky to have some flexibility and to not, always be working full time in the time I was a parent, and I know people that have found lots of different ways, leaning on community, leaning on family, if they can pay for things, paying for things. So I agree, you have to find a way to honor the various parts of yourself, but also respect that there are a certain number of things that need to get done and somebody has to do them. So it could be you and you could not be doing whatever other thing it is, or it could be somebody else. And I think to some degree, that's like there's some math there.
Yeah.
And we need to take some of the value judgments out.
I think that's a really kind way of telling me to calm the fuck down because it's not all gonna
It
get
seems to me you're getting a lot done, Ashley.
yeah, but,
Yeah.
I'm, like, talking to you as a friend, but also knowing that people are gonna be listening to this, but I feel it's so hard for me to get out of that mindset of unpaid work still being work.
Yes.
I'm working so hard because I am working several jobs at one time, and some of them are paid well, and some of them are not paid. And I'm constantly trying to evolve this part of my brain that tells me that if I'm not contributing in the way that Mark is contributing, that something is off. But because that's my model, right? Both of my parents worked and they both worked traditionally enough, right? And that's just not my life. And which makes
Uh.
it hard in my brain. Like I have to continue reconciling over and over again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I sure do, and I think, it's up here. I'm pointing to my
100%. 100%.
I'm pointing to my head, and it also, I think, has to do with your partner, and changes in what the expectations are, and to let yourself off the hook.
I
You know,
know.
just to think about one day, like your kid is homesick and you're supposed to be working, like not everybody has flexibility. It's lucky to have flexibility. But I
True.
think even when you do, there's this mental shift, for me to just be able to say, well, I'm not working today. And
Yeah.
just like cross it off your mental list. And
Yeah.
so you're not driving yourself absolutely crazy. But I think to have a partner that respects that and doesn't just take it for granted,
It's
I
huge.
think, yeah, I think as you said, the work does not feel valued, but if at least within your family,
Yeah.
you feel like, there should be some respect that if your partner is working more hours, that the only reason they can do that, right? We don't see that is because you are home,
Right.
right? And it's so taken for granted that in a heterosexual couple, the mom is the default
Yes.
that, sometimes it feels like a luxury to me that like, my husband is the primary breadwinner, but he knows he can go to work and he knows he can spend all day doing his work.
And that's it.
As moms,
You
like
gotta focus on.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe you can do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel more political about that. I feel more political. I feel like we need to just not just think like, what's wrong with me that I can't always be doing five things at once? I will give, oftentimes I am doing five things at once. Thank you very much. But if
Right.
I can just be like, nope, couldn't do that today,
And just let it
because
go.
whatever, and again, it's in me. It's the
Mhm.
struggle, and obviously it's socialized in, but I think I feel political about like that mental shift.
That's so important for me to hear. Thank you. I have to just
Plus, you're doing like so many jobs, Ashley, and so many. So I don't even know whatever thing you're not doing that you're referring to
I
for the
don't
day.
I don't know. You know what it is? In some ways, I feel like I'm living the life I wanted to live when I was 6.
Mm.
Like I finally get to be her now. And so there's also this energy of like I'm so happy that I'm here and also when am I going to feel comfortable? And I think the answer is that I'm not.
Well, you're an ambitious person, Ashley, but I also think when you have little kids, it's more work and
Yeah.
it's more time, and I will never be one of those moms of teenagers that says, just you wait. It's, I just think that's obnoxious. I think that
It
that
is.
disrespects how labor intensive it is to have little
Thank you.
kids. And
Thank
I
you.
will say that, and you're on 24/7, right?
Yes.
So when your kids are older, you do have more headspace, more time in your day. Like kids are not sick every single day.
Yeah.
So I would say you're nailing it, number 1.
Love you.
And
Thank
number
you.
2, there is more space. I have one kid in college, and now I started taking Spanish, and I started weightlifting.
I love that so much. Yes.
So, I just think you have to respect how much time and energy things take.
Mm,
And I think that about parenting too. Like, if I'm having a challenge, um, with a kid, oftentimes when things go south, it's because I wanted to check that off my list and move on to the next thing. But when I respect the time and energy and mental, like, bandwidth, that it's like, okay, my kid is not going to want to do this, and I'm going to bring some good energy to it. Like, really respecting that that is going to take what it's going to take to do it the way, that's going to work. Um, so I think about that a lot. When I get stressed out, I try to do less. Like, "Well, I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and my list is so long." It's like, "No, why don't you do these 3 things?" And then I'm actually a lot more efficient. So I think being able to say no and say, "I'm not gonna do X today," um, for me makes a big difference.
you don't even know the gems you are dropping. Like
I don't
stuff that
know.
like I
I
will
don't know,
literally
actually.
carry with me forever. Um, but
Mm.
because I also see the parallels even between what you're saying about parenting and politics too. It's like there has to be respect for the time it takes, for the stage that it's in, for the world that we live in, for like even as we're fighting for something new, we still have to live in what's here right now. Like to me, you know, that it's such a gift to hear you say these things and then for me to make these connections in my mind because it's just easy to lose sight of the fact that it's supposed to be a journey and the fact that it's supposed to take time and effort and energy and persistence and consistency and all of those things and this is actually life
Mhm.
doing it.
Mhm.
We're doing it.
Yes. Yeah, I think parenting teaches you a lot.
Yeah. 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 Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you need us to know before we wrap this podcast up?
Hmm. I would say, write those letters, right?
Yes.
That was a really, really important. Sometimes, we will post, here's a letter you can write, and there's 100 likes. Well, I can see how many letters went out, and it's 20. So
Right.
somebody is
Right.
liking it and not writing the letter, and, we try to make it really easy. We know, folks are busy, so I would say, like, you get all those action alerts in your inbox so much that they seem a little bit overwhelming,
Yeah.
but that really makes a difference on the other end, and those letters really add up. Even if you just add your name, even if you don't write anything, even if you don't personalize the letter. So I would say, that.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah,
I also
just
have to ask, just this popped into my head, is it more impactful to be more focused on local or like state level things? Like if I'm going to give time, energy, money, whatever, should I be totally focused on Massachusetts or should I be more focused on broader, bigger things?
I think we cannot ignore the federal landscape right now, so I would encourage people to be active on that, and that has implications, here in Massachusetts, of course.
Mhm.
But I also think that many issues, around health, for example, do many decisions are made at the state level, and there is a huge opportunity to make a difference. The district, I mean, if you just look at the districts, I'm a member of the Massachusetts legislature versus Congress, it's fewer people. So if that person hears from 5 or 10 people, as I mentioned, part of what you're doing is not just whether somebody would vote for or against. In Massachusetts, very few bills actually even make it their way to that stage. It's something rising to the top of somebody's attention. And my mentor, Ellen Story, used to say, if there's a budget debate every year on all of the money that the state spends, and legislators can file amendments. And she would say, my district is so small that if 5 people write to me about the same thing, that's my budget priority.
Oh
That is
my
the one
gosh.
thing that I'm gonna try to get out of the budget cycle this year. So I think, um, yeah, we cannot ignore what is going on federally. Um, but you can really, be a part of the process here in Massachusetts.
Wow, wow, wow.
So
Thank you.
get to know your legislator. There's a tool you can click and it will tell you who that person is.
Okay. What I'm hearing from you is that there's actually a lot that you can do even within the time constraints, even if you're working all day, even if you're a parent of young kids, like there is something for you. And I think that that is huge.
Yeah, and I would invite people to be part of the coalition. I think that's part of why our coalition has been successful is because we're all living through this time and people are feeling helpless and they want to get involved. And then on our specific issue of perinatal mental health, may have some lived experience that they've never shared.
Mm.
So I think that we have been able to channel people wanting to jump in and make a difference. And I would invite anybody to be a part of it. I didn't share much about who is in our coalition. It is a huge range of people. So there are individuals, organizations, people who have never set foot in the state house, never even told their story, all the way up to Mass General Brigham's government relations person comes to our meeting, Mass Medical Society, the midwives, so all of the healthcare groups, and then middle-sized groups from across the state. The geographic diversity is also really important, and then a lot of wonderful community-based organizations that really inspired our work on the Moms Matter Act. So we're all at the meetings. If you email me, I'll put you on the list to get the notifications and come as infrequently or as much as you would like. But we're pretty energized and we have a good time.
I love it.
Yeah, and we're taking action.
Thank you so much for your grounding presence, all of the information that you gave, everything that you shared. Jessie, I appreciate it so much. I know other people will too. Thank you.
Thank you. And you have inspired me on this issue too. I think some of the things that you have said around either you're having a day at home or around unpaid work. I know you have a large platform and um you're such a good thinker on these issues and not afraid to tell it like it is. And I think people really listen to you. So um, I think you are part of the public conversation is really important too. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, everybody. We will link everything that you need. We'll make sure that you have, oh my gosh, all of the ways that you can be useful, all of the ways you can get in touch with Jessie and keep up with the work that she's doing and the people that she works with. We'll take care of it all. So follow the show, share the episode. This is an important one to share with people. My goodness. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
Bye.